Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Digital Transformation, Can You Implement Successfully? I'm just delighted to be sharing this content with you today. It's something that is top of mind for so many individuals in so many parts of the world. I'm also especially excited because I'm joined by a guest. I would like to introduce my colleague, Fred Stowitz. As you can see on the screen, he's well awarded. He's focusing in now on creating effective solutions to promote sustainable profitability in the digital age. That's straight from your LinkedIn page, Fred, and it's so descriptive of what you do, because he really is focusing in on how do you help organizations be more effective in digitalization. And so, as you can imagine, myself and effective managers who focus in on organizational improvement, it's a wonderful partnership in terms of supporting each other's skills. He's got deep organizational experience. He's worked on the American Space Shuttle program. He's worked with Royal Dutch Shell, and check out his LinkedIn page. He's got an amazing background. He's also an international speaker and a successful publisher. I don't know where you get time to do all of this stuff, Fred, but thank you for joining us today. I'm just delighted to work with you on this. My name is Dwight Maholitz. If you haven't met me before, I'm the president of Effective Managers, and I work with heads of organizations to help them implement their strategy as effectively as possible. And we have an organizational performance model which we use with organizations and particularly owners of organizations to help them do the best that they can. Fred and I will be sharing the presentation today, but I would like to kick it off with just some insights into the current situation that we're in. It is challenging times. We're faced with this global pandemic, which is a situation that none of us in our lifetimes have ever faced before. It puts us in a situation where organizations are, well, at the beginning, we're in an emergency response. You know, can I survive? How do I protect my employees? Do I have to close shop? What's going to be the impact on my customers? How long can I manage with this different level of income? You know, will I be able to stay the course? It's moved now into a situation where most organizations have found how to adjust their business model to manage through the interim phase. Some, of course, have fallen by the wayside. Some are even more successful because they're able to adapt and provide services in new ways that respond well in their environment, in their communities. But for the most part, organizations are now just kind of hunkering down and figuring out how to be as effective and efficient as possible to make it through the lockdown. Coming out of that, and we know there will be a coming out of it, it's uncertain, organizations are now starting to prepare for how do we deal with the new normal. But what we can't forget is that over the past, before the pandemic and over the past period of time before that, there were a number of factors that were causing potential disruption. And you see two of them on the slide here. The near recession coming into 2020. We're now in a full-blown recession. But what does that mean going forward? I think there's no question that there's going to be a global recession that will impact all global economies. But how long will that be? How long will the bounce back? And then that's the undertone of that is the political, social unrest that we're facing, the trade disruption that we've been facing because of political disruption in major players. So all of these are questions for us in terms of how do we get back to the day-to-day business? And that's what we all want. We want to figure out how to return to that pre-pandemic level and how to operate efficiently in that new normal. So this is how do we take advantage of the changes that we're making now so that we can leverage these as we move forward and move into growth mode and try to get back to where we have to be. So we need to figure out how to develop some stability, and everyone is being forced to rethink not only how they do business, but how do they prepare for businesses in the future. So I hand it over to you at this point, Fred.
And that's not just in business, it's in throughout society. These factors are impacting how people live, how schools operate, as we know, whether, whether they're going to open up in this fall or not, and particularly how businesses and commerce operates within this environment. But we're facing another challenge too. If we go to the next slide. The digital age technologies. These have been on the table for several decades now. And a way to think about it is not all challenges are bad. Challenges offer the opportunity to rethink how we do things, and they offer also opportunities. And particularly with the digital age technologies, they offer some potential solutions to the issues that were just presented on the previous slide with the coronavirus and the economic downturns and how to operate more efficiently in these conditions. So the digital age technologies, the way I view those is that that's a tremendous opportunity that is being presented. The general consensus is that the timeline for that is being accelerated by about 5 years, that under normal previous conditions, we would have just kind of integrated a little bit here, a little bit there, but that timeline is being accelerated by the estimated 5 years of shortening how soon companies are looking at implementing the digital technologies. And one of the benefits that they offer is a more efficient operations, more timely results, and some touchless transactions that really feed into how to respond to the pandemic situation. Next slide. What I want to do is just take a few minutes and look at some of the opportunities, some of the things that the digital technologies are offering to kind of get that framed in people's minds as to why that offers a competitive advantage. The one that really intrigues me is on the lower left-hand corner. It's the contact lens with electronics in it. And what that does, it's not necessarily fits into a business setting, but it monitors glucose levels in diabetics. And they're also talking about putting cameras in or some other devices in the contact lenses that can determine where your eye is being directed at any point. It's interesting right above that to have a cell phone applique on your wrist. Businesses may not want to rush into the technologies that are more humanly invasive. Ones that are more adapted to industrial settings, particularly in the training arena, as you see in the center, are the virtual reality, where you wear the goggles and the items that you see, the reality of the environment is created with machines. You can move into a machine safely where you couldn't normally do that. You couldn't even normally look inside a machine, but with virtual reality, you can move into environments that would be hazardous otherwise. And in industrial setting, ones that are really intriguing are the upper right-hand corners, the artificial reality goggles, because it's like you used to see on the movies, the fighter pilots had the face mask that came down, and they would have information presented to them, the controls on the face mask, so that they didn't have to divert their eyes from looking outside of the cockpit. That has tremendous advantage in terms of presenting safety information, maintenance information about equipment, environmental conditions, and also monitoring the individuals in adverse conditions such as heat, how they're responding to the hot environments and things like that. So it provides a two-way communication to people in the field of providing them useful information that can help them be more efficient, more effective in performing their operations. You can also have then digital artificial reality, artificial intelligence, which analyzes data and presents, looks for patterns that humans would take thousands of years to recognize, where computers and artificial reality technology can recognize in just a very short amount of time. present those patterns to the decision makers within the organization, and they can make better decisions as to how to operate more effectively and efficiently. There's also automated processes that can utilize computer bots within computer systems to monitor and transact, affect transactions. But there's just a wide range of opportunities that the digital technologies are offering to business to be more effective. It's just the fact that for a lot of people, it's kind of a new process, but the way it's useful to look at it is that this is the future. If we go to the next slide, say we have two businesses. Now the future resides in a smart enterprise. If we got a smart enterprise on the left with Enterprise Alpha, and we have competition that's operating in the way that they've done things in a manual, analog form, compare what's going to happen to those two businesses out 5 to 10 years from now, and maybe even a shorter time frame. On the what makes a smart enterprise is a complete digitalization of their processes. On the lower level, you see a robot, you see the workers, you see kind of the line operations. A lot of digital technologies fit into that area of helping workers and or doing routine tasks in a much more efficient manner than the current workforce. So in some areas, it's going to mean replacing workers with the automation. In some areas, it's going to mean augmenting what workers can do and help them do it better with the digital technologies. So the IoT devices, the handheld devices, the artificial reality goggles, things like that, drones, we've got the completely autonomous robot. You see those at trade shows sometimes, moving around and talking to participants, kind of demonstrating their capabilities. You see the robotic arm there that in a manufacturing line is replacing humans in performing routine tasks, and then you see the little green start button where the automation is impacting computer systems processes that are moving online and being automated. But implementing those things requires data coming in and out of that line operation. And what the first line of thinking is that if I'm going to implement any of these, I don't want to create additional silos. So I've got to have some way to manage them across the board throughout the organization. So I implement some IoT devices, I implement some automation. I don't want them to not be able to communicate with each other at some point. So I've got to have a systems integration platform that manages the flow of data throughout the organization, both into the systems systems integration platform, into a big data storage, and then when analytics and AI give us information about modifying and improving the effectiveness of those, feeding that information back down into the line to what the line employees are. So with the example of the artificial reality goggles, that the individual can feed information to the big data, it's analyzed. AI can feed information back to the individual out in the field and allow them more greater awareness of what's going on around them and give them greater access to greater resources. So you can imagine that over a few year span that this Enterprise Alpha is going to be improving their processes and continually refining and moving routine things into automation, utilizing technologies that help the line employees operate more effectively. The competition is going to pretty much be stuck with doing things the way they've been doing them, and they're just not going to be able to keep up. So it's a matter of the digital technologies are the future, and it's a matter of how quickly we migrate in that direction. So it's not really a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. And as I mentioned before, the current situations, the current challenges are increasing that migration. Next slide. But the technology is not the only factor in creating a return on investment. The challenge is that the technologies have to integrate within key infrastructural elements of the organization. The organization has to assimilate that technology into their operation and make it a smooth integration without too many hiccups. There's going to be some challenges with that, but there's a study done by McKinsey that indicates about 70% of integrations fail. That's a pretty high number. I would say they fail not because the technology doesn't work, but because the infrastructure to support that technology and the culture within the organizations to support that technology were not merged. And so what Dwight and I have put together is this list of 10 key infrastructural elements of organizations that really have a strong impact on the success of a digital implementation. Now, just quickly go through these and kind of hit some high points on each to kind of tick that off in your memory. Managerial effectiveness, that's the digital tech isn't going to get rid of all managers. So how effectively do they operate? That's still an issue. That's going to be an increasing issue with migrating to a new normal, to a new way of operating. The flexibility and adaptability issues. Professional development. Digital tech requires a new set of skills, a new skill set. How is that going to be deployed? That's the training programs. How are they going to operate? Do you have effective training programs? Knowledge capture and sharing program. Digital tech will have its own set of problems and issues that need to be resolved. What's the process for capturing the solutions and sharing those solutions across the organization? Risk management and safety, always of extreme importance. Implementations are disruptive. How do you manage the risk and ensure safe operations during the implementation and in the new normal? Of great concern. Management of change program. Conditions have changed. The digital implementation will create a new normal. Is there an effective transition plan? Performance management. Is performance currently at optimal levels? Not saying most organizations not, because there are factors within the organization, we'll talk about this a little bit more, there are factors within the organization that distract from optimal performance. Workflow structure. Will digital tech automate a faulty workflow process? If you're automating a process, is that process optimized before you do the implement the technology? Resource management. Operations stop without access to necessary resources. Whether the operation is digital or manual, how reliable is the supply chain? Again, the implementations are going to be somewhat disruptive. If there's some questions about the supply chain, then those should be resolved on the front end. Organizational effectiveness, tremendously important. Are the operational silos throughout the organization? Are there operational silos throughout the organization? Or do these systems work together? As most of us know, most organizations have some issues. So it's useful to find those issues, help correct those issues before the implementation. Culture management. Culture is often explained as how we do things around here. If how we do things is the old-fashioned way, will a digital tech implementation even be accepted by the workforce? That's a big question. That probably has a lot to do with the McKinsey report of nearly 70% of implementation processes running into problems. Next slide. If these things are not optimized, then all we're doing is continuing, we're dealing with the situation of continuing poor performance. We could say poor performance, we could say suboptimal performance, but it boils down to lost productivity. There are errors and potential rework, there are delays, increased expenses, poor customer experience, and operational inefficiencies. The targets and the expected ROI, the return on investment for an implementation, is not going to be achieved if you don't consider and make sure that all of these programs are working in conjunction with each other to augment and to make sure that the implementation is successful. And I think we switch over to Dwight now.
We do. Thank you, Fred. That was an amazing introduction. I really appreciate that. Just a quick pause here for everyone. I was so excited to get into the content, I didn't do my intro to let all of you know that we will be sending a PDF of these slides to all of you, so you don't have to make notes of stuff that you see on the screen. And if you have questions, we're saving time at the end for a Q&A or discussion session. There's few enough that we can probably open all our mics and just have a discussion. But if there's anything that you'd like to chat about with each other or flag a question, feel free to use that chat box that's available to you. That would be a great way of doing that. As Fred was talking, I was thinking back on the amount of time that we spent working on this, because we did a fair amount of going back and forth, and thinking about how do we help organizations be as successful as possible. And it really does come down to this slide. When was the last time that you had a tune-up? If you're driving your car and you're just in daily driving around the city, you want to have your tune-ups done regularly. But imagine you're just about to start that pandemic in-country, cross-country travel journey. You're going to have that tune-up because you want to make sure that things are going to go as smoothly as possible as you're on that trip. Well, it's exactly the same kind of thing in preparing for a major change initiative in the organization. To the extent that you can be aware of any issues in the organization, to the extent you can be aware of the strengths of the organization that you can leverage, but also those opportunities for improvement, those weaknesses, those things that could get in the way of you being as successful as possible, really do need attention. So having this third-party objective snapshot of your organization and the pluses and minuses in terms of what you'll be facing as you go through this major transformation or major implementation becomes really, really important. So that at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're kind of Xing off these opportunities for the poor performance or the loss of productivity, or as Fred has so rightfully stated, the 70% chance that you won't successfully implement. You quoted, Fred, the McKinsey study, which I'm familiar with. John Cotter, who's a guru in change management, did a similar macro analysis of change programs around the world. And he came up with exactly the same number, whether it's a strategy or an implementation of a change program of any type, including IT programs and digital programs. 70% of the time, results were not achieved. And in fact, at the strategy level, he found that only 5% of the time were the objectives achieved. So the other 25% are somewhere in the middle. So the odds are against you unless you can really understand what are those factors that are getting in the way of your possibility for success. So as Fred stated, we did outline these 10 areas that are the critical factors that you need to be thinking about before implementation and to help you prepare for implementation. And what we're going to do now in the next few minutes is just give you a little bit of a deeper insight into what each of these are. So we'll trade off on these, but I'll start on the managerial effectiveness one. Of course, this is my specialty, so I'm passionate about it. And the Effective Managers Company was founded based on research that we did with the University of Ottawa, with a number of countries, with a number of different companies, where we surveyed all managers in each one of these companies to understand what was getting in the way of their effectiveness. And the results were enlightening, to say the least. For the first time ever, there was a quantitative measurement of how much time managers spend on their value-added work. And the answer will amaze you. It was 55%. So almost half the time that managers spend at work are on things that they don't believe are adding value to their job. So they're being distracted. There's churn in the organization because they're not able to focus in on those things that they should be focusing in on as managers. And the research also reinforced to us in a huge way that managers are that critical link between the owner, the head of the organization, and the front line that's doing the work and engaging with the customer to ensure that those strategic goals are being translated into a language and delegated in a way that makes sense at each level down, but also to create that feedback loop in terms of what's going well, what's not going well, what can we change, where should we expand, where should we cut back, and so on. So that manager role becomes a really critical aspect. So embarking on any change program where you don't have a good understanding of whether your managers have the capability to be successful in implementing that change is problematic for you. So having an understanding of that and understanding where the key issues might be in terms of departments or managers or managerial effectiveness overall becomes really important. Back to you, Fred, for professional development program.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite areas. This is where I started my career, was setting up technical training programs. And the digital technologies require a new set of competencies. And so it's important that an organization be able to manage competencies, because you're going to have to bring in a new set of skills to work with the digital technologies. And typically, there are three ways to do that. One is you hire them, one is you buy them, and one is you train them. The market has not developed yet to the point that there's a glut of well-trained technologists that can operate this technology. That's still new. The universities and the training organizations that prepare employees for working in this area are still ramping up in this. So it really defaults to organizations need to have an effective training program within the organization, or access to one that they contract out to that's going to be able to provide those skills. And the most effective ones that I've encountered are competency-based. And the reason for that is that the competencies, if you identify competencies, you can link that competency to the work performed. The work performed changes, you can change, okay, I need to provide another competency, or I need to modify what I'm, the training that I'm providing to the individual to keep them in sync with the work. That's a problem with most training organizations, is that they are locked into, they develop maybe good training on the front end of a process, but they don't keep in sync with the changes of that process, and their training organization stays locked to what they were trained initially, and so they fall out of sync, which is one of the reasons, unfortunately, that training personnel are the first to be laid off in a downturn, where they should be the most important factor in coming out of a downturn and implementing new technologies. Next. This really runs parallel, the knowledge capture and sharing program, because this is how do we solve problems? Is there an organized process to capture, retain, and share solutions to costly problems? Do these problems continue to reoccur because we're not capturing them, we're not sharing them with the right people? There is unfortunately a new process to a lot of organizations. There's I worked with a lady here in Houston that set up just a phenomenal process, and it's not something you turn the switch on overnight, but it's something that you manage throughout the entire organization to identify when you have problems, how to get that problem to the right people, to surface it to throughout the organizations that need to know the solutions. A lot of organizations will have subject matter experts, but to some degree, those subject matter experts are siloed, and they often have issues getting their knowledge out to the people that need it. So having a program like this in conjunction with an effective technical training program is a really, really good foundational element for backing up an implementation process. Next one. Now, risk management and safety, what you should be noticing is that these things work together. We can identify 4 separate programs, but these programs need to have overlap. They need to be what we've listed here, the first 4 are enterprise-wide programs. Unfortunately, with risk management and safety, often you have the safety people and then you have the operational people. That creates a silo, that creates a problem in sharing information that needs to be on the line at an operational level. So with risk management safety, the idea of identifying and sharing problems, the idea of getting competencies to the people that need those competencies is an element of managing risk. And one way to assess that, how well you're doing that process, is are your incidents slowly decreasing? If you have a bump, then you're not managing it. You're kind of floating blind in some areas, and a lot of organizations do. Their incident chart will be up and down. That indicates that they're not managing risk. They're responding to it. True risk management will produce a downward trend on your instance and requires both leading indicators and lagging indicators to effectively know what's going on in those areas. But that has a tremendous effect on an implementation of digital technologies, because any implementation is inherently disruptive. The most influential factor in managing risk is managing stress. Uncertainties create stress. Implementation creates uncertainty about is this implementation going to remove me from my job? Is it going to replace me? Am I going to have to learn something new? What's the future look like? That creates stress in the workforce. Stress in the workforce creates the opportunity to make mistakes or make errors. That opens the door for safety issues. And so this is a really, really important area to have a good handle on before an implementation process. Next. I think we switch back.
We do. It's this brings us to the management of change, and this is an area that many organizations struggle with. Remember the 70% number I quoted earlier from John Cotter about 70% of change management programs fail to deliver results. So this really is about how do you manage change in the organization, and understanding, having that snapshot of your success or not in previous change programs can really help you to understand what kinds of things you need to do to ensure that when the digital change is implemented, that you can do a better job. There's just a few things to take in mind. I like the 2 red bullets here. I think they're great, that most change programs are overly cumbersome and they run into unforeseen complications. So there are ways, there are best practices in terms of change management. One of the key ones is to have that committed leader that is visible, that's willing to stay the course. So often in change programs, it's this great idea. A lot of energy is put into the change at the top of the organization, but then as it's being implemented throughout different parts of the organization, the focus tends to dissipate. So you take your eye off the ball, and as a result, the resources, the training, the reinforcement, the support that is necessary from managers to each one of their subordinates at all levels. By managers, I mean executives, directors, and managers. Anyone who manages a team tends to be lost. And as a result, there's this diffusion of energy, multiple change programs happening at the same time, a lack of focus, a lack of understanding of what's most important. So as a result, in the workforce generally, there's this kind of skepticism tends to build in. Oh, here's another change program. It's going to impact me in a way that I'm not sure of. So let's just keep our heads down and hope it goes away, as opposed to really focusing in on. So the important part of having this real focus, describing that change, how it's going to improve not only the organization, but the work lives of those in the organization becomes really, really important. And then really focusing in on this role of managers at each level of the organization being accountable for implementing that change. Too often, the accountability for the change is not well understood. The change project manager is thought of as the person that has to implement the change, when at the end of the day, it's each worker and the manager of each one of those workers that is accountable for implementing the change. So understanding where you're at can really help you to understand what you need to put in place to be sure that you can be as successful as possible in this change as well. Back to you, Fred. Oh, I had a few extra bullets here, which we're just sharing now. I didn't realize that. They were supposed to come up automatically, but I guess I failed in my animations. Over to you, Fred.
Okay. The performance management, does the performance management program actually motivate employees to perform well? That's HR is in a process of change over the past few years, and that's they're coming to realization that performance management is a day-to-day, is delivered best on a day-to-day basis, not at an end-of-the-year type of review that you go through everything that happened through the year, and this is what was good, this is what was bad, and do better next year. And that really connects strongly with managerial effectiveness, because managers are the ones that usually are the interface between the employees in terms of managing and delivering feedback on the employees. So if the managerial effectiveness factor is working well, then there's a better chance that the performance management program works well. And if it isn't, then there's a chance that this doesn't, because the connection, the employees have the strongest connection with management and get the most direction from their management. And if that bond, if that is a strong bond of trust and respect, then that goes a long ways in terms of driving performance. If it isn't, then there's an issue. And in terms of trust, then as we said, there's uncertainties in terms of going forward with the implementation. And if the trust factor is there, then what the employees are being told from management, they may not trust that that's actually what is taking place. So it's a really strong connection between managerial effectiveness and performance management programs. They need to work in conjunction with each other. Okay.
Thank you, Fred. 100%. I agree with that. And it's similar kinds of things in workflow structure, because workflow is all about how work moves across the organization. And it's all about who is accountable for doing what in each step of that process. So having a program in place to ensure that people understand their role with respect to that process, but also their role with respect to others. How do I support them? How do they support me? Becomes critically important. Because if you don't have that in your process, you end up with each handoff being negotiated each time in terms of, is the quality right? Is the timing right? Is the workflow process overall right? And it's a similar issue here as in change management. Very often the process manager is just too low in the organization to be able to make decisions that will impact the improvement. Sure, they can train and support and negotiate and try to mediate issues, but at the end of the day, what you need to do is really have the appropriate accountability and authority structure in place to ensure that that workflow is moving well. In our own research, we find that 50% of managers believe that work does not flow smoothly through the organization. So it's absolutely an area that you need to understand for your own organization in terms of how well things will work or not. Fred?
The resource management program are critical resources available there and effective operational resource supply chain. The resource management program offers a process for forecasting, planning, scheduling, allocating resources in support of maximizing operational efficiencies. As we may have heard on the news in the last few months in terms of the virus situation, the distribution of masks, the access to ventilators was a resource scheduling nightmare. That the ventilators, some hospitals had them, had more than enough, some hospitals didn't have enough. Getting them in the right place was a critical issue to serving the healthcare needs of the public. And it was very problematic. In terms of needing resources when your work processes are changing, if your resource management program isn't resilient and adaptive, then there may be issues as you're needing different resources in different places, getting those in the right, to the right place. Plus, in one venue or in one interpretation, you can also view that resources are the human cognitive resources of the skill sets, and making sure that people are in the right place and connected, as well as the tools and the resources they need to do the job and serve customers. As we've mentioned on most of these, you'll see that the last item that's included in red is the increased cost. When these things are not working optimally, what it's doing is it's making the job of the people that you've hired to do the work harder. Their performance is not as optimized as it could be, and that's increasing costs across the board. And if you're going to tax them further in terms of the implementation, then you're going to start seeing those costs, and those costs are going to come out of your return on investment for the implementation. Okay.
Thank you. We're coming down to the last two of the 10 issues now, and they're the broader ones that are a snapshot of the organization overall. So the first one is organization effectiveness. So how effective is your organization in terms of its overall capability to be successful? And there are indicators that we can measure there in terms of how well work is coordinated, how well people are communicating throughout the organization, how well the support functions are supporting you in terms of doing that work. The whole point of this one is to get a sense of how much wasted energy is there in the organization. I call it organizational churn. It's that expenditure of time and energy on things that aren't really germane to the strategy of the organization, to doing effective work, and to being as successful as possible as an organization. So having that understanding before a major implementation becomes really, really important. And back to you for the last one, Craig.
Culture is one of my favorite topics in the organization, because it drives everything that happens within the organization. Does the organizational culture support safe, effective operations, productive operations, and customer service is really the question. And I find from reading a lot of articles, from talking to a lot of professionals, that culture is one of the most misunderstood processes in an organization. I say on here, the slide, culture management program. There are very few, if any, organizations that actually have a culture management program. So it's somewhat an area that is often spoke of as you have a culture one way or the other, and it's a question of, are you paying attention to it, and are you directing it in an effective manner? A quick way to think about culture is that if you relate to whether there are so many factors in culture that impact how people behave, same as the weather, that unless you're a psychologist or a meteorologist, you don't fully understand all of those factors and how they interact with each other. What you do understand is what you see. In the weather, you see Is it raining? Is it windy? You see all those things outside, and you can react to them and figure out what all those factors have fed into the result that they've created. In the workplace, all those factors feed into creating behavior. You can look at the behavior and you can see, is it productive behavior? Is it risky behavior? How does it fit in with our operation and what we want to have happen? Behavior is always driven by the environment, the work environment. So the easiest way to view culture is, first of all, as behavior, and second, the way to manage it is to manage the workplace environment. So what you're managing is how people experience that environment. And you're not putting a sign up on the wall and say, we behave this way, we all do this. That has little to no long-term effect. What has the long-term effect is how people experience the work environment, and that drives their behavior. Think of the culture in two modes. One is the aspirational culture. That's what we would like to have. That's what the management of the organization would like to have. That's why they put the signs on the wall. But the one that drives how things actually work is functional culture. And functional culture always trumps aspirational culture. And if the culture does not accept, say the culture is, as we mentioned before, this is how we do things. Well, if the way we do things is manual, not technology, not driven by technology, then you're having to change an entire culture to do the implementation and to get them to accept it. And so you have to have a really good change management process to drive the culture in the direction of accepting these new technologies. So it's a really, really important factor. As you may have noticed, all of these things integrate together. You could say, you could probably summarize them as how effective is your operation, and you could spin out. But it's, Dwight and I have found it's useful to actually pinpoint these different programs and different elements of the organization, to take a specific look at those, because they have such a dramatic effect on an implementation process. Okay. That gets to why it's important to do an assessment, why it's important to do a checkup, not just periodically, but particularly before a long trip, but also do it periodically so that you know that these systems are working well. And we say awareness, action, and impact. If you don't have an awareness and you're taking action, then what's that action? What do you expect that action to achieve? So you need to have an awareness of the environment that you're working within, what the current state of that environment is, and how you want to drive that environment to a new state with the impact. So the first thing is to assess these 10 areas, have a good understanding of how well they're working, what's not working about them, and see that what you can remediate about those before doing an implementation that increases stress, that increases confusion, that potentially confusion, that causes some element of disruption. Take a look at these areas first and have a good idea of where you're starting from. Then create an action plan with the vendor that's going to implement the technology. You don't want to just focus all on the technology and forget about the structures that has to be integrated within, and the people that have to utilize that. So figure out your action plan, and then you're going to achieve, most likely, the impact that you wanted, which is the return on investment. But if you don't have that awareness on the front end, then it's questionable as to what direction things the return on investment is going to go. One of the things I tend to say is don't layer disruption over dysfunction. And that means take a look at these things, have an awareness of what element of dysfunction are you. And I see I misspelled dysfunction. I need a Y in there. We'll fix that for the next one. The understand what element of dysfunction, and every organization has some dysfunction in it, but understand what the level is and where those key elements of dysfunction are, so that they don't increase the disruption of the implementation, and that your implementation has a better chance of achieving the return on investment that you really are shooting for. Okay.
So in summary then, when was your last checkup? We're going to, I've just got a few slides in a minute or so just to point you towards some resources. and to summarize, and then we'll open it up for questions. I think there's few enough of us on the line. We'll just open the microphones. I see Christiane from Brazil has put a question in the chat, and we will have time to get to that as well. So really the question is, when was your last checkup? Organizations tend to be focusing in on what I call the output measures. You know, what is our production levels, our sales levels, our profit levels, our you know, our delivery, our quality, so on. And they don't focus as much on what I call the input measures. You know, how we go about creating value inside our organization in order to drive those output measures. And there's a sense in organizations that these kinds of things that Fred and I have been talking about aren't as optimal as they could be, but there's never a quantification, or very seldom, I should say, a quantification of how we are doing in each one of these areas. So to have that objective viewpoint that can help you quantify how we're doing, where we're strong, where we're maybe not so strong, and where we could really use improvement can improve your chances of an effective implementation. But even more so, it can help you ensure that you're being more effective as an organization overall. So the impact is not only for this one digital change, it's for the overall effectiveness of the organization. So we've given you a lot of information today. You can find out more information on the Effective Managers website under the Services tab. And here's a bit.ly shortcut which can get you there directly. And we do have blogs. There's some blogs I've written on digital assessment, and one that Fred and I co-wrote, which will be published very shortly, hopefully later today. And you can learn more about all of these different factors that we've been talking about at the Effective Managers website. So do feel free to go there. You can also check out the Effective Managers YouTube channel, where there's a lot of video, if you prefer the video experience about these, and including some less than 10-minute vidcasts on some of these important areas. And then finally, you can subscribe to our e-news. I can connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook if you'd like to connect and keep in touch with each other that way. And just to reinforce, do click on that resources tab in the Effective Managers website to get some helpful support for you in any of the challenges that you're facing. So thank you very much for that content. You can tell that Fred and I are both passionate about this. We went a few minutes over our 45-minute timeline, but I'm going to open it up now for discussion, and we can start with the question that we have from Christiane. Fred, did you have a chance to read that? Would you like to take a first crack at that?
Let's see, the question. I would like an insight from you regarding if and how introducing digitized technology in organizations and speed with which this is happening will change their size and oligopolies as we have them today. Thank you for the insights. It's always comforting to realize we're not alone or wrong while going through these change-generating processes in our own experiences. I think that.
Yeah, okay, and just before you answer that, Fred, while you're thinking about it, I've from the system side unmuted you, so now each of you can also unmute your microphones if you'd like to talk with us directly. Sorry, go ahead, Fred.
I'm thinking that there's not a one-size-kind-of-fits-all response on that. That each organization, depending on how they interface with customers, what mechanisms they have, that's really going to be on an individual industry type of basis. That there's certainly going to be an effort to change the size in terms of decreasing the number of people it takes to produce the work and the results for customers. But as you might have seen with in terms of Amazon, I think Amazon is hiring at a phenomenal rate, because they're just everybody's going to online ordering and online delivery. So it's not necessarily that everybody's going to be decreasing. It depends on the type of operation, really, to a large degree. It's the key factor is efficiencies and being able to do things with less effort. I think that's kind of the key takeaway.
Yeah, go ahead, Christiane. Did you want to respond to that? Okay, I just yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I agree. Thank you. I agree, and I Thank you very much for the insight. I think my question also goes to developing these technologies that normally huge organizations have a lot of bureaucracy and they are not ready to do this or to change as fast as they should with these technologies. So either what, like you said, either they die or they buy out the smaller ones so that they can capture those technologies. And I don't know if this is a good model for the future.
Mhm.
I think it's the model of humans that older people are more resistant to change, and the new people learn to do things faster and smarter, and they eventually put us in retirement.
I just, and part of it, and your answer got me thinking, Fred, because so much of the examples we give are of the Uber or Kodak, and the change in the film industry, or what's happened to GPS technology, or the Swiss watch industry. But in fact, these things are happening at a more micro level over and over again everywhere in all organizations. And it doesn't have to be that huge disruption to a whole industry. It could be at in a sector, or even in a village or a community, where somebody figures out how to do things better and faster and cheaper, and all of a sudden they've got the competitive advantage. So what we need to do is think of, we as management consultants and practitioners need to think about, is what are those things that we can do and implement successfully, because the competitive advantage is there. So don't be disrupted, be the disruptor.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is there's a need for increased adaptability and flexibility in terms of responding to market situations. And I think that's the lesson that people are learning across the board at the current time, is that to stay in business, you have to be really flexible. You have to be able to figure out what's going on, and with a whole ton of uncertainties around it, but being able to respond and adapt quickly, and have a workforce that responds and adapts quickly. So as Christian mentioned, the larger companies are not able to respond that they have a lot more wealth and stuff to make mistakes and to continue their existence. But over time, that's going to wear against that too.
Yeah, it's the battleship analogy. They're big and strong and they can continue on, but it's really, really hard to turn. Nanya made an interesting comment in text that technology has changed the workplace environment, and we need to change we need to guide our clients to adapt. I think that is absolutely so true. Fred, you and I had some really interesting discussions leading up to this, and I think that I'd be very happy if you could share your thoughts about how does an organization know whether they can use an assessment like this?
Well, I think that if you take out the technology, take out the change, this is a matter of how effectively does an organization operate. These are key factors that they show up really strongly when there's increased stress because of implementation or because of changing environment. But this is simply how do organizations operate effectively and efficiently, and it should be an ongoing situation. As you mentioned, we get our cars checked at least once a year. This would, I think organizations would really benefit by at least having a check like this once a year, whether they're doing an implementation or not. But to look at these systems, and because they're being from coming from a technical training development program background, I see where there are deficits in productivity as a result of the competencies that people have, the motivational drivers that they have. And there are the biggest place that companies can save money is by cleaning up that operation, by ensuring that the employees have a foundational workplace that supports them in being successful. And the question is, why wouldn't you want somebody you hired and paid to do something be successful in that endeavor? The obvious answer is you would. So don't work against the employees.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Tatiana's put into the chat as well, thanking us for the webinar. Thank you all for that feedback. We appreciate that. And she's talking about working with an NGO and its organizational restructuring, which involves a digital transformation. So good luck with that, Tatiana. I'm glad that this was helpful to you. And if you have any questions about how these concepts can apply in your situation, or if you think the assessment could help you in positioning that change program, please feel free to reach out. We would be happy to support you in that. And I reinforce, you have our email addresses in the deck that I'm going to be sending around. If you have any questions that we haven't covered off, if you're curious about how this might apply in your situation, please do feel free to reach out to us. We're committed to supporting you. And I will be later today sending around an email with a link to this recording and also the PDF of the slides so that you have this as a resource. And if you know anyone else that you think would be interested in this information, please do send it around. I think it would be very good to get this out as widely as we can. We know this was a relatively small group today, so it gives us this chance to exchange more freely. It was very well registered, but I think most of the respondents will be enjoying the recorded version instead of joining us live. But we're happy to support in either way. Fred, any closing comments?
I just mentioned that later this month we're doing a more detailed look at culture, and that is a phenomenal driver of performance. It's of interest almost to everyone in business, but I think there's some easy ways to understand it that are being currently missed, and that's what we want to fill in the gap there and provide a way to relate to culture and a way to manage it effectively.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fred. Great content. I appreciate you joining me on this. And thank you
My pleasure.
to all of the participants. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, whatever time zone you're in.